"Sir, I need you to step back," the guard said, his tone firm but impersonal. "Could one old photo change everything?" Walter stood there holding a faded photograph in his calloused hands. "My grandson owns this building," he replied softly, his voice steady. The second guard let out a short laugh, his eyebrows arching. "Yeah, and my dad's the CEO of the country," he said, chuckling. So, Walter stepped back, settled quietly by the wall, and waited without complaint. 40 minutes later, the elevator door slid open and a man in a crisp black suit stepped out. What he did next hushed the entire lobby and reminded everyone what it truly means to respect and honor. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. Walter Price sat on the edge of the marble bench, his hands folded carefully in his lap. He was nearly 80, though the weight of his years showed more in the quiet patience of his eyes than in the lines of his face. The old Marine Corps dress jacket he wore was faded at the edges, the brass buttons dulled by time, but he wore it with the same quiet dignity he had carried through every chapter of his life. Walter had lived alone for years in a small house at the edge of the city, a life of early mornings and long walks in the quiet, a life he'd chosen when the world outside grew too fast, too loud. He had raised his grandson, Jason, in that house after Jason's parents died. Long nights of telling stories by the fireside, teaching the boy how to hold a hammer and how to stand tall. But time had a way of pulling people in different directions. Jason had grown up, moved on, chasing dreams in the city's bright towers. At first, he'd visit often, driving out to the edge of town to share coffee and laughter. But as the years passed, the visits grew fewer, the calls shorter. The demands of a rising career left little room for quiet conversations in a small kitchen. Walter didn't blame him. He understood ambition, understood the hunger for something bigger. He'd seen it in the faces of young Marines under his command years ago when the world seemed endless. Still, he missed those visits, missed the boy who had once looked at him like he was unbreakable. He hadn't seen Jason in person in over 3 years. The phone calls had become rare, just a few words on birthdays, a polite check-in at Christmas, and though Walter had accepted that, the distance still sat heavy in his chest. But that wasn't why he was here today. A few months ago, the doctors had told Walter his heart was failing. They said it gently with soft voices and sad eyes, as if that would soften the truth. He didn't feel sorry for himself. He'd lived a long life, seeing things most men never would. But as the days turned into weeks, he found himself thinking more and more of the people he loved, and he knew he needed to see Jason one last time, not for apologies or explanations, not to ask for anything at all, just to look at the boy he'd once carried on his shoulders, and see for himself that he'd grown into the man Walter had always hoped he would be. So he rose early that morning, dressed carefully in the uniform that had carried him through so many battles, and pinned the medals to his chest, not out of pride, but because they were a part of him, a reminder of every lesson he'd ever taught his grandson about duty, about honor, about the quiet strength it takes to keep going. He took the old photograph from the frame in his hallway, the one of him and Jason on graduation day, both of them smiling like they knew exactly where they belonged. The ride into the city was long, the bus weaving through morning traffic as the skyline rose higher with every mile. Walter didn't mind. He watched the buildings stretch up into the clouds, the glass and steel shining bright. He thought about how Jason had built his life here in these towers, how he'd made something bigger than either of them had ever imagined. When he stepped off the bus, he paused on the sidewalk to catch his breath. The headquarters of Jason's company rose above him, all polished glass and quiet authority. It was the kind of building that seemed to hum with purpose, people in suits moving quickly, voices low and sure. Walter squared his shoulders and stepped inside. The lobby was bright and cool, the marble floors gleaming under soft lights. Receptionists moved behind sleek counters, their smiles practiced and polite. Businessmen and women passed by, their conversations clipped and hurried, their eyes never lingering on the old man in the corner. He paused at the security gate where 2 guards stood watch. One was a tall man, his uniform crisp, his eyes scanning the room with practiced calm. The other was younger, his expression more open, but no less firm. Walter approached them slowly, holding the photograph gently in his hand. "Good morning, gentlemen," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm here to see my grandson, Jason Price. He's the chairman of this company." The younger guard looked at him, his brows knitting together. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" he asked, his voice polite, but edged with the authority of someone used to saying no. Walter shook his head. "No appointment," he said simply. "I just wanted to see him." "I won't be long." The guard shared a look, one that spoke of policies and procedures, of the quiet machinery of power that turned behind every door in this place. The older guard spoke up, his tone even. "I'm sorry, sir. Without clearance or an appointment, we can't let you pass the lobby." Walter nodded. He understood rules, he had lived his life by them. Still, he held out the photograph, his fingers steady. "This is me and Jason," he said softly. "He was just a boy. Then I wanted to see how he's doing." The younger guard took the photo, studying it for a moment. He looked back at Walter, then at the photo again, the smiling young man in the cap and gown, the proud grandfather beside him, but he handed it back with a small shake of his head. "I'm sorry, sir," he said again. "I'm sure he's very proud of you, but without an appointment, there's nothing we can do. Walter took the photo back, tucking it into the inside pocket of his jacket. There was no anger in his face, no sign of bitterness, just the quiet resolve of a man who had learned long ago that sometimes the world turns its back whether you deserve it or not. He stepped back from the gate. Moving to the edge of the lobby, there was a bench there. Near the tall windows that looked out over the city, he settled onto it, his back straight, his hands resting on his knees. The guards watched him for a moment longer, then turned away, their attention returning to the endless rhythm of arrivals and departures. Walter didn't seem to mind. He looked out the window at the people passing by, the lives moving so fast around him. He thought of the small house he'd left behind that morning, the garden he tended with careful hands, the memories tucked into every quiet corner. He thought of the boy who used to chase fireflies in the summer dusk, who had looked up at him with wide eyes and asked him how to be brave, and he thought of the way distance can grow like a slow, quiet river between two people, not out of anger, but out of time. Walter Price had lived a life of service, of sacrifice and honor. He had learned how to wait, how to stand still when the world rushed by, and he would wait here as long as it took because some things are worth waiting for. And for Walter Price, the chance to see his grandson one last time was worth everything. Could this quiet wait lead to a reunion? Walter sat still against the cold marble wall, his back to the world rushing past. His hands clutched the photograph as if it were an anchor in the rising tide of people. Every few minutes he would glance up at the elevators, watching the doors open and close, a silent rhythm that never stopped. The two security guards watched him out of the corners of their eyes. One of them leaned closer to the other, voice low. "Crazy old man," he muttered, "thinks he can just walk in here and see the boss." Walter heard them but said nothing. He had lived through worse than whispers. He simply sat, breathing slow and steady, letting their words pass over him like water over stone. The lobby around him was alive with motion. Men and women in sharp suits strode across the polished floor, voices clipped and urgent, their shoes clicked out a steady beat, a metronome of ambition and purpose. No one looked at him, no one noticed the old man in the corner. To them, he was just another shadow in the bright humming world of glass and steel. Walter looked down at the photograph again. Jason, on the day of his graduation, his cap slightly askew, a shy grin on his face, Walter's own arm around his shoulder, the pride in his eyes plain for anyone to see. He remembered that day as if it were yesterday, how Jason had held the diploma in his hands, looking up at Walter with that bright, hopeful light in his eyes, how he had whispered, "I'll make you proud, Grandpa," and Walter had believed him with all his heart. He remembered the years that followed, the long nights when he sat by the phone waiting for the boy to call. He remembered the envelopes he'd mailed quietly, small checks to help with rent, with textbooks, with the thousand small burdens of youth. He had never asked for thanks, he only wanted to help the way he always had. Those memories were soft as breath in his mind, but today, they weighed heavy on his chest because time had passed and life had swept Jason away into this world of endless motion. And Walter, he had been content to watch from a distance until the doctors told him his heart was growing too weak to wait any longer. So he sat there, the photograph warm in his hand, the memory of that promise still echoing in his mind. "I'll make you proud, Grandpa." That was all he wanted to see in Jason's eyes again, just once before it was too late. Across the lobby, two junior employees paused by the reception desk, whispering to one another. "Have you ever actually seen Jason Price?" one asked, eyes wide. "I heard he practically lives up there on the top floor." "Guy never takes a break, he's a genius," the other said, with a kind of awe reserved for stories of self-made kings. "Started this place from nothing. Now he's running half the city." Walter listened without meaning to. Their words drifted through the air, painting a picture of the man his grandson had become, a driven, relentless figure, a leader, a visionary. But to Walter, Jason was still the boy who had once fallen asleep in his lap, small hands clutching his shirt, the boy he had taught to stand up straight, to speak with kindness, to never forget where he came from. He shifted on the bench, his old bones stiff from the cold floor. The guards glanced at him again, still wary, but no longer interested. To them, he was just another harmless relic of curiosity, not a threat. Walter didn't mind, he had no intention of causing trouble, he was just waiting. He could see the elevators clearly from where he sat, the doors sliding open and closed, revealing glimpses of a world he no longer understood. Men and women in tailored suits, briefcases in hand, eyes on their phones and nowhere else. Jason's world, and still he waited. He thought of the nights when Jason was young, the times he'd wake from a nightmare and Walter would sit beside him until the dawn. He thought of the promises he'd made to himself back then, that he would always be there, no matter how far Jason wandered. Today was just another part of that promise. A young woman at the reception desk noticed him finally, her brow creasing in curiosity. She walked over, her heels clicking softly on the marble. "Excuse me, sir," she said gently, her voice warm but uncertain. "Can I help you with something? You've been sitting here a while." Walter looked up at her, his blue eyes calm and clear. "No, thank you," he said. "I'm just waiting." She paused, studying him for a moment, then she offered a small sympathetic smile and walked away, the echo of her steps fading into the background hummed. Walter turned his eyes back to the elevators, patient as ever. He didn't know how long he would wait, and it didn't matter. What mattered was the chance. The chance to see his grandson, and to show him that some things endure, even when the world rushes on without you. He sat a little straighter, lifting his chin. The photograph rested in his hand, a quiet testament to everything that had come before. Could this patient wait turn into a heartfelt reunion? The guards glanced at him again, but said nothing, and Walter, he just kept waiting. In the quiet moments between the opening and closing of the elevator doors, memories drifted through his mind like gentle waves. He remembered the way Jason used to run to him when he came home from deployments, tiny arms wrapping around his knees. He remembered the boy's laughter, bright and sharp like the crack of dawn over the ocean. He remembered teaching him to ride a bike, running alongside him down the dusty road until Jason found his balance. Those memories warmed him now, a quiet fire in his chest. They reminded him why he was here, why he would keep sitting in this lobby until someone came to tell him to leave, or until Jason finally appeared. He could hear snippets of conversation around him. A woman's voice, bright and practiced, "Mr. Price will be in meetings all afternoon." A man's voice, low and urgent, "We need a signature on these contracts by the end of the day." Jason Price, chairman, visionary. The world knew him as a man who built an empire from nothing, but to Walter, he would always be the boy who once asked him if he was brave enough to wear his old Marine medals in public. And so Walter sat, patient and unyielding. He had no illusions about what might happen. He knew Jason was busy. He knew he might sit here all day and never see his grandson's face, but he also knew this family was worth waiting for, and Walter Price had never walked away from something worth fighting for. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the rhythm of the lobby wash over him, the rise and fall of voices, the distant chime of elevator doors, the muted thunder of a world moving too fast. He was an old man in a young man's world, but he was here and he was ready to wait, because he believed with every breath in his tired lungs that one day the boy in the photograph would walk through those doors, and in that moment, everything would be as it should be again, even if only for a little while. Walter shifted on the hard bench, adjusting the photograph on his knee. The minutes had stretched into an hour, the hour into something longer still. The hush of the lobby around him felt almost comforting, like the quiet before the dawn. He knew the world outside didn't wait for anyone, but Walter had never been one to flinch from waiting. He was a Marine, and Marines didn't back down. As he watched the elevators, a flicker of movement caught his eye. The doors slid open in smooth, silent motion, and out stepped a group of men and women dressed in tailored suits. Their voices were hushed, their steps precise, the air around them charged with the weight of decisions that shaped entire futures. At the center of that group stood a man in a crisp black suit, his posture confident, his eyes sharp. Jason Price, the name on every tongue in this building, the face that graced magazine covers and news feeds alike. Jason paused as he stepped into the lobby, his gaze sweeping the crowd with practiced calm, but then his eyes fell on the old man sitting quietly by the window. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Walter sat up a little straighter, the corners of his mouth lifting just slightly. The years had changed Jason. The boy's smile had grown into something more controlled, more guarded, but in that instant, Walter saw through the crisp suit and the polished shoes. He saw the boy he'd once carried on his shoulders, the child who had whispered, "I'll make you proud, Grandpa," and he saw the sudden flicker of recognition in Jason's eyes, a soft crack in the armor of a man who had learned to keep his heart hidden. The young man behind Jason was saying something, a report, a question, but Jason didn't seem to hear. His eyes stayed locked on Walter. The rest of the world falling away, the hush in the lobby deepened. For a moment, no one moved. The guards exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do. The other employees shifted their weight, sensing that something had shifted in the air. Then Jason took a single step forward and another. His movements were sure, but the set of his jaw betrayed the storm of emotions rising behind his calm. He stopped in front of Walter, the space between them crackling with memory. Slowly, deliberately, he took off his glasses and folded them into his pocket. His eyes, bare and vulnerable now, never wavered. Walter looked up at him, his own face calm and steady. He saw the man Jason had become, the weight he carried in his shoulders, and in that look, he offered something that didn't need words. Jason lowered his head. In the middle of that grand lobby, with everyone watching, he bowed to his grandfather, not as a businessman to a guest, but as a grandson to the man who had taught him how to stand tall. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. The guards stood frozen, their eyes wide, every word they might have said dying on their lips. Even the chatter of passing employees fell silent, replaced by a hush so complete it felt almost sacred. Jason straightened slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. "You came all this way," he said, his words catching in his throat. "I should have known. I should have come to you." Walter gave a small shake of his head. "No," he said quietly, the word as soft as a prayer. "I just wanted to see you, that's all." Jason reached out, his hand trembling just slightly, and rested it on Walter's shoulder. His grip was gentle, but there was strength in it, the strength of someone who had finally remembered what truly mattered, and in that touch, Walter felt the years fall away. "I'm sorry," Jason said, his voice cracking as he looked into Walter's eyes. "I'm sorry I let it go so long." "I'm sorry I made you wait." Walter's fingers tightened around the photograph in his lap, but he didn't say anything. There was no need. He had always known that Jason would find his way back. Jason turned then, his gaze sweeping over the two security guards standing rigid at their post. His voice grew stronger, each word ringing with quiet authority. "This is my grandfather," he said, "the man who taught me everything I know about honor, about keeping your word. He is not a visitor. He is family." The guards swallowed hard, their eyes wide with sudden understanding. One of them opened his mouth as if to speak, but the words wouldn't come. They looked at each other, then down at the floor. The other employees who had paused to watch stood still, their expressions shifting from confusion to something closer to reverence. The man they had always known as a driven executive was in that moment just a grandson honoring the man who had shaped him, and in that small silent moment, the building itself seemed to stand a little taller. Jason turned back to Walter, his hand still firm on his shoulder. He didn't say anything more, and he didn't need to. The silence between them was full of everything they had ever shared and everything they had yet to say. Walter looked up at him, his eyes soft with pride. In that instant, he saw not the boy he had raised, but the man he had become, and he knew, deep in his bones, that every sacrifice, every long night, every quiet word of encouragement had been worth it. The lobby remained hushed, the only sounds a soft hum of air vents and the distant click of elevator doors. It felt like the world had stopped spinning just for them, and in that stillness, there was no doubt, only the simple, unshakable truth of family. Jason's voice dropped to a whisper meant only for Walter. "Come upstairs with me," he said, "please. Let me show you what you built in me." Walter hesitated only a moment, then he rose from the bench, slow but steady, his back straight and his eyes clear. He slipped the photograph back into his jacket, resting his hand over it for just a moment. Jason slipped his other arm under Walter's elbow, offering support, but not imposing it. Together, they turned toward the elevators, the hush around them like a benediction. The employees parted for them, a quiet, instinctive gesture of respect. Walter didn't look back as he walked beside his grandson. He didn't need to. The past was behind them, and the future was in every step they took together. And in that simple act, a grandson's hand on his grandfather's arm, a silent promise in every breath. The distance of all those years fell away. The world outside would keep turning loud and fast and bright, but in that moment, in that lobby, there was only the quiet strength of a family that refused to be forgotten. And for Walter Price, that was all he had ever needed. Walter felt the hush settle around them like a warm blanket as Jason guided him through the lobby. The silence wasn't empty, it was filled with quiet respect, a recognition of something too rare to name. People stepped aside without being asked, their faces softening as they watched the young CEO walk hand in hand with the old Marine in the faded jacket. Jason didn't look back, his chin lifted with a quiet pride. He had always carried his grandfather's lessons deep in his bones, but today he let the world see them. Today, he let everyone know that the man beside him was the foundation of everything he'd become. They reached the elevators, the polished steel doors gleaming beneath the soft lobby lights. Jason paused, his hand steady on Walter's shoulder. He pressed the call button, the small circle glowing gold beneath his finger. When the door slid open, he guided Walter inside with a gentle reverence. The small mirrored cabin felt like a world apart from the rush and noise of the lobby. Walter stepped inside, his posture still straight, the photograph safe in his pocket. Jason turned to face him, his expression open, stripped of the calm authority he wore like armor. In this quiet space, he was no longer the CEO of a powerful company, he was simply a grandson, grateful for the chance to be a boy again. "Grandpa," he said softly, his voice shaking just enough to be human, "you taught me what respect means. You showed me that real strength isn't loud or proud. It's in how you treat people, even when no one's watching." He swallowed, his eyes shining. "I needed you to see that today. I needed you to know I haven't forgotten." Walter smiled, a small, gentle curve of his lips. He reached up, resting his weathered hand against Jason's cheek for a moment. "I see it, son," he said, his voice no louder than a breath, "and I always knew you would." The door slid shut with a soft sigh, cocooning them in a moment of perfect stillness. Walter could feel the gentle rise of the elevator beneath his feet, the steady climb that felt like an echo of every step Jason had taken to reach this place. It was a small miracle, he thought, the way love can outlast time and distance, the way it can find its way back when you least expect it. Jason's hand tightened on his grandfather's shoulder, grounding them both. "Today," he said, his voice strong again, "I wanted everyone to see where I come from. I wanted them to understand that all this," he gestured around them, the walls of steel and glass, "none of it matters if I forget who I am." Walter's eyes softened, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. "That's all I ever wanted for you," he said simply, "to remember, to hold on to the things that matter. No matter how high you climb." The elevator slowed, a soft chime announcing their arrival at the top floor. Jason took a deep breath, turning to face the doors, and in that moment, Walter saw not the ambitious young man the world knew, but the boy who had once looked up at him with wide eyes, asking if he was brave. When the door slid open, the hush of the lobby below was replaced by a bright, airy space, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city, sunlight spilling across sleek floors. and clean lines, but Walter didn't see the view or the polished conference tables. He saw only the pride in his grandson's eyes, the quiet assurance that he had done something right. Jason led him to a small seating area by the window, a place that felt far away from the boardrooms and busy minds. He helped Walter into a soft leather chair, his movements careful, almost reverent. Then he sat across from him, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between them. For a moment they sat in silence. The city stretched out beyond the glass, 1,000 lives moving in quiet rhythm below, but here in this sunlit room, it was just them. "Grandpa," Jason said at last, his voice soft but sure, "everything I've done, everything I've built, it started with you. The things you taught me, the way you lived your life. I carry it all with me. Even when I didn't come home, even when I let the distance grow, I never forgot." Walter reached into his jacket, pulling out the photograph one last time. He handed it to Jason, the paper worn and soft at the edges. "I've carried this with me," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, "to remind me of who you are and who we are together." Jason took it carefully, his fingers tracing the edges of the image. He looked at his younger self, the boy in the cap and gown, standing beside the old Marine who had taught him how to stand on his own 2 feet, and he smiled, a real, unguarded smile that chased away every shadow in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything, for always being the man I needed, even when I didn't realize it." Walter's smile deepened, the lines around his eyes crinkling with a quiet warmth. "That's what family is, Jason," he said softly, "not the easy days or the proud ones. It's the quiet promise that we'll stand by each other, no matter how far we drift." Outside the window, the city moved on, bustling and bright, the world turning just as it always had. But in that quiet office, time seemed to slow, each breath a gentle echo of the bond they shared. And in that stillness, Walter felt a kind of peace he hadn't known in years. He knew his days were growing shorter, the weight of time pressing a little heavier on his bones. But here, with his grandson's hand resting over his, he knew he had seen enough. He had seen the boy he'd raised become a man worth every quiet prayer, every long night spent wondering if he'd done enough. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the room in warm gold, Walter let out a soft sigh. He closed his eyes for a moment, the gentle hum of the world beyond the glass fading into a lullaby. And in that small perfect silence, he felt the truth settle deep in his heart, that some things, love, respect, the promise of family, are stronger than time, louder than any crowd, and brighter than the tallest tower. They are the quiet foundation beneath every grand ambition, the thread that binds the past to the future. When Jason spoke again, his voice was hushed but sure. "I won't let them forget, Grandpa," he said. "I won't let them forget where I come from or who I owe everything to." Walter opened his eyes and smiled. He didn't need to say a word, because in that moment, beneath the hush of the city and the quiet strength of shared memory, he knew that his legacy was safe. As Jason rose to walk him back to the elevator, Walter stood a little taller, his back a little straighter. The world outside would keep moving, bright and restless as ever, but in that small sunlit room, there was only the quiet triumph of 2 men, grandfather and grandson, who had found their way back to each other. And as the doors slid shut behind them, the city seemed to breathe a little easier, the hush of reverence lingering in the air like a promise kept, because some things can't be bought or built or forced. Some things, like love, like gratitude, like the quiet dignity of an old Marine's patient heart, can only be earned, and Walter Price had always known how to earn it, one steady breath at a time, one small kindness at a time, one quiet act of faith in the man his grandson had become. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition, some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.